right, what's up, everybody? I think we are live now. Yeah, it looks like it. Be sure to hit me with a comment. Let me know if we're live, if we're going strong here. Good to see everybody. Today we're going to talk about ledge fishing on Chickamauga. So a lot of things to discuss today. I just want to let a couple people get on here. I know I started a little early again, but YouTube's been crazy lately, and half the time it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So we will see. It wouldn't let me premiere my video yesterday. There they are. What's up, people? What is up? I'm going to answer on my phone here. All right. So is everybody geared up and ready for some ledge fishing on Chickamauga here? Let's see. Move this where I can see just a little bit. Bear with me here. Now we're cooking. Now we're cooking. All right. All right, so first thing, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into this here. Wow, crazy screen for a second. All right, we're on Chickamauga. Congratulations. I've been out here already, you know, the fish, it seems like a lot of them are, in a lot of ways, a little bit behind, but there's a bunch of fish that moved out, and we had that hot weather that came through the last few weeks. A lot of fish moved out, and they moved out really deep, and so a lot of these ledges started to pile up with fish, and now we've had this cold front that's kind of pushed them off again. There's not as many fish deep, but I anticipate here, you know, we've had this rain. I anticipate in the next week and a half, the ledge bite's going to get really good again, so y'all need to be paying attention to it. If you have any questions or anything, make sure to leave them in the comment section. But we're just going to break down a lot of places that I think it's a good area to look for these fish. We got Rebecca in the background here. What's up, Adam? What's up, Steve? Let's see here. Bill asked if the ledges are mostly on the main channel, and that's a good question. You know, a lot of the ledges that, you know, people typically think about and typically want to fish in the summertime are going to be main river ledges. So basically what that is you've got the original river channel, which is this deep area here, that was the original river before the dam flooded the lake. So these areas, these main river areas, are going to be where a lot of those fish go to. You know, you got these flats right here, the main river edges, and there's going to be, if you actually go through on a lot of these ledges, especially ones that are adjacent, immediately adjacent to big flats like this, you can actually go down through there and catch fish just fishing the ledge itself, kind of like you would fish a bank, you know, along the side of the river as well. But what I focus on is irregularities in the ledge itself. So here's one example of this. Now, we talked about this in some previous videos, so make sure you look back through there. Make sure you look at the last couple videos I posted too. The one about river fishing specifically, I did a complete guide to river fishing and talking about how current impacts, you know, different parts of lake structure, whether it's humps, ledges, rocks, and understanding how that swift current interacts with these areas will really help you identify the right areas to fish and how to properly read those areas and fish them when it comes to ledge fishing or slower moving river water. So inside turns like this one right here, anytime you've got an inside turn like this, what it's going to do is it allows that water to cascade across on this upper end, and those fish have a spot that they can set and ambush bait, because what happens is the bait gets washed back and forth along these ledges. So finding those is extremely important. Outside turns, or basically small points, can also be good, especially I notice those are good when there's less current. So what happens is on the Tennessee River here, we get current fluctuations. I'm going to pop over here to the TVA app, and this is what I recommend you guys look up. Look at Chickamauga lake levels, or go to this TVA app right here at the top, and that will give you the current up-to-date statistics on what's going on. So right now we're running into the mid-40s, or 45,000 on the hourly discharge. This is kind of standard summertime, you know, expenditures as far as the dam goes, and this is really good for ledge fishing. I noticed that anywhere once you get over 30 and under about 60, the ledge bite is really good. So this is kind of standard. But what happens is, let's see here, we'll go to the previous 48 hours. Typically in the morning, there's less current. Uh-oh, page is not working. Let's see if we can get it to work here. You can do it, little buddy. But typically in the morning, there's less current, and you can see that right here. So we've got 2 a.m., 4 a.m., you can see that we're running in the 20s. Most of the time it's around noon or so. So you can see at 11 o'clock they actually boosted the current. Now you also have to understand when they boost this current up, so they get it to the proper level here, it doesn't interact all the way up the lake immediately. So in other words, you think of it kind of as a domino effect. It takes time for that amount of current to interact or to act upon where you can visibly see it, like on the marker buoys and stuff further up the river. So areas closest to the dam, when they first turn on the current, you'll immediately see the change in current. You get that immediate bite window. Mid-lake will take several more minutes in order to start to see the effects of the current there. Upper lake, much longer, of course. So that's an important thing to realize. So if you're planning a ledge fishing day, typically you're going to understand that it's going to start around the middle of the day when that current starts to peak. So you start that ledge fishing day, and typically what you want to do is fish south to north. So in other words, hit the areas that you want to hit on the south side and work your way up the river. And if you get your timing right, you can get close to when that current first starts to interact there. And that's the important thing. If you'll notice below, when you're fishing below a dam, when you're fishing tail races, you'll notice when that current first starts to change or first, gets either higher or lower, that's when the fish really tend to bite the most. So if you're there right when that happens, you have a much better opportunity to make a bigger fish miss. And again, you can see here as it gets early in the morning, less current and then more current. So we'll pop back over here to the ledges. I'm going to answer some questions over here. What are these places? I see a lot of fishermen fishing. They're not fishing near the main channel ledges other than main river channel ledges. Well, there's a lot of ledges that you'll see that are on secondary channels. So let me get an example of a secondary channel here. Run down lake. All right, so here's a good example of a secondary channel. So you've got the main river channel right here, and then you've got a secondary channel that's running back onto a flat. And what will happen is there'll be fish that are on those ledges as well a lot of times. Another example is this one right here. You'll find fish on those ledges as well. This is main river right here, but we've got an offshoot of a major creek, Wolf Teaver Creek over here. And a lot of times on those areas, you'll find fish on ledges. There's also ledge fish that you can find in the creeks themselves, So it's not just relegated to the main river, but that's where you'll find those mega schools. The biggest schools of fish, in my experience, I typically see will be on the main river where most of that current interacts. Let's see here. Douglas says, how deep should the ledge be before it's worth your time? Now, that's a good question there. A lot of times there's a huge variance on different ledges on where the fish will sit. So a lot of these main river humps, this is a Chester Frost hump, whatever you want to call it, right outside of Chester Frost here. A lot of these main river humps, I notice that the fish will tend to sit deeper, especially if there's less current. So the less current there is, typically the deeper those fish will sit. As there's more current, they'll start to push up that ledge itself. And that's true for a lot of these other main river spots as well. What'll happen is as you get more current, it's uncomfortable for the fish to sit out deep. It's uncomfortable for the bait to sit out deep, so they'll transition, sometimes in really high current situations, all the way up onto the flat itself into that 6 to 8, maybe 10 to 12 foot of water. So you have to be wary of that as well. So the depth of the ledge is not as important to me as how the current is interacting with it, how much bait tends to be in that area. I have ledges that I've caught fish on this year all the way out 35 foot of water plus almost 40 foot of water. And I have other ledges that I've caught fish in 12 foot of water this year already. So it really depends on the conditions of the lake in that particular area. And that goes back to, watching that Tennessee River or that river fishing complete guide video where you can talk about reading the level of current, reading where those fish should be positioning. And that app really helps for that as well. You know, a lot of times as you get more experience on your body of water, you know, this is applicable all across the Tennessee River system, any river system really. So anything that's relegated by a dam, as you get acclimated to your particular dam, their particular way of pushing water, you'll understand and have preconceived notions of where those fish should be setting up. Let's see here. Do we find them primarily on the upstream side? Yes. Frank asked that question. Most of the time, and again, we'll go back to that river fishing video, you know, think about this as a small stream. So say this is a rock, this big hump right here. Say it's a rock in a small stream. What'll happen when you have a lot of current cascading over that rock, you know from trout fishing that you have an eddy on the front side and you have an eddy on the back side. Those are two areas that are comfortable for those fish to sit. What they do is they basically ride an endless wave when they're on this front side. And typically on the front side of your ledge or your point is where you're going to find the most active fish. Those are the fish that are most actively feeding. So if and all I can, I will try to find fish on the front side of whatever main lake structure I'm trying to fish. So we got one hump there. This area right here is actually a very well-known community hole. People hit that all the time. But another thing that people discount a lot, I notice, again, is those, you know, these secondary channel areas where you have this, you know, this is a point in a secondary channel. When you have a lot of current especially, it'll interact with that point and there'll be a load of fish that'll stack up on that kind of an area. Same thing here. You have a lot of fish that'll stack up on these kind of areas as well. Another thing is bluff walls. So when current, you have this current running around here, impacting, dead ending into a bluff wall, typically the transitions on the back side and the front side is a good place to look. Again, when you have a channel swing like this, there's a lot of current that's flowing across here and you have a natural break that's coming in this area as well, and so you can look for fish along those parts of ledges. I'm going to run up here to another secondary channel area. You know, anytime you got these deeper secondary channels, those are great areas to look as well. You know, you have the classic community hole here that all the guys fish during the major tournaments is right around this area. But you look at these contour lines. So you can see it really from this distance best. Right in here, you have contour lines that are close together but not super close, and they're really close together here. That's showing you a transition on that ledge. So you have an area that's relatively steep going to almost a bluff wall right there. And what that'll do is those fish can hang out right in that area. As bait pushes through, they can swing out, grab that bait, and go back. Another great place is anywhere a creek or, you know, secondary channel meets the main channel. Here's one right here. So you've got this pocket going back into here, nice and deep. It comes out wherever this interacts with that main river ledge. You see that little inside turn there. Boom. That's a prime spot for fish to be sitting. Prime spot for a mega school. We'll go back up to some of these major creeks here. Let's see. Bear with me. All right, Sail Creek, right out in front of it. You see where this channel from the creek itself meets out here? Prime area to be looking for a school of fish in the summertime. And again, there's a ledge transition here. You see how we've got contour lines that are not super tight going to really tight right there. That's one of those transition areas on the ledge itself. Great area, prime area to look. And another thing to be conscious of is when we're fishing ledges, a lot of times what we're looking at is a shell bed. So you can actually find these shell beds, you know, when you're running your electronics themselves, they'll show up as a much brighter contrast bottom. So basically you'll have kind of the dull contrast, and as soon as you get to hard bottom on side scan down imaging, it's really bright. Or if you're running traditional 2D, you'll have a double line there to indicate a really hard bottom. But you can find them in advance using your mapping here. These flat spots, so see how those contour lines are really spread out right there? That's typically, anytime you find that, you're going to have a shell bed in that area. Especially right here. I can guarantee you there's a shell bed on that particular spot. Same thing right here. But that's something that you can look for in advance. Again, shell bed, going to be right in this area. But that's something that I look for. You're looking for main lake humps like this. This is typically where you're going to find your biggest mega schools are going to be main lake humps like this, where creeks transition into the main lake. But those areas are also going to be the most pressured areas that you're going to find. So a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm looking for secondary spots. You know, going along this ledge right here, you see really tight contours, looser contours right here. That's an area I'm going to check and see if I can find a smaller school of fish. Typically, early season like this can be some of the best time to catch big fish when you're ledge fishing, because you can catch them when they're transitioning out of the creeks, when they're transitioning off the flats there. And what will happen is you'll find them in these little areas, and there'll be smaller schools of fish. You know, you'll grab and you'll see those fish on the side scan. A lot of times on the side scan, they show up as little bright spots, but if you're on a shell bed, everything's bright. So a lot of times you can't delineate where those fish are. A key way to actually find those fish, and I'll probably do a video on this, is to look for shadows. I was out with Joe, he's on here the other day, but those little shadow lines on the side, you can see the shadows of the fish when you can't actually make out where they are. Another thing you can do is you can idle up on top of the ledge, look out, and if they're suspended fish, you can see the marks of the suspended fish using side scan like that. The other way is to use traditional 2D, and I got some good questions the last time we did a live stream about how to properly idle a ledge area to, kind of get the most out of it. Now, for me, I never have much success finding fish going directly down the ledge like this unless I know exactly what depth range. The other day I was out and it seemed like every fish that I was marking was in that 25 foot of water. So I could technically run that ledge at 25 foot of water and get a pretty good indication of where the fish are. But most times what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that thing at a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to cut it in a segment like this. And if I have a specific area that I want to look at, so say there's a contour change here, I can see that the transition is right in this area and right over here. Typically the fish are going to be on the transition itself. So I don't want to idle directly across here. I don't want to idle directly across here. I want to go at a 45-degree angle directly up that transition. I want to think about it as where that current is hitting. I want to be running directly up there so I can see the most on exactly where those fish should be setting up. You have to plan in advance when you're idling these runs. You have to think about where those fish should be setting before you even make your run up through there to idle and graph them. Otherwise, you can just go back and forth on these ledges and you're really wasting a lot of time. You need to have this planned out in advance. Most of the time when I'm doing a ledge fishing day, I'll have 20 to 30 spots already lined up, already marked in my head where I think the fish should be. And then I can quickly go to those areas, do a quick idle. It should take you, 5 to 10 minutes max to idle an area, figure out where the fish are sitting that day, because a lot of times it does change day to day. And then sit down there, fish another 10 minutes, see if you can fire the school. If you can't, then you move on. Again, like we talked about, from south to north, typically, especially if you're a tournament angler. There's some instances, especially on these community holes right here, that you might actually want to just post up. Some of the times when there's good fish there, and if you leave those fish, you're not going to get back on that spot. So if there's some good fish there, sometimes it's actually a good idea just to kind of hang out there and wait for those fish to fire there. I'm going to go back to the comments here and see what we got going on. Let's see. Jim asked if they have apps for all the lakes. Pretty much TVA, all your Tennessee River lakes, you can go through there and they do have an app for pretty much every lake in Tennessee. Each state's going to have their own version of that, so you can go back through there. But the TVA app has Nickajack, has Watts Bar. I think it even has Gunnersville on there. What's up, Joe? How deep? Let's see, great info. Josh says, is it better to fish near the dam or the upper end of the river when ledge fishing? Going back to what I said before here, so if you're ledge fishing, when you get near the dam, if you're talking about the upstream area, let's go up here. So this is Chickamauga as you get towards the upper end, towards the dam. If you notice, there's very little main lake structure out through here. You have very steep sides here. Water flows very quickly, so there's not as many good areas, in my opinion, to ledge fish. What I look for in ledge fishing is areas where flats intersect and a lot of creeks intersect. So as you push down river, you start to notice more and more of that. So really the first area I see that I would like to ledge fish is just right outside of Richland Creek here in the Moon Slough area. And then as you go down, you see how these flats come across here. As the lake widens out, typically those are going to be your best areas to ledge fish. Here's another area that you could key in on. And again, here's, we got a bluff wall right here. Bluff wall transition, great area to look in the summertime. Secondary channel cutting across here. Transition right here. Great area to look during the summertime for these fish. But these kind of ledges that are adjacent to flats is what you're going to be typically looking for. On most Tennessee River lakes, those are actually going to be towards the middle or the lower third of that lake. So I hope that helps you there. Let's see here. Differentiating bass from white bass, carp, etc. Okay, so one thing that I'll notice when I'm ledge fishing out here, that's a good point. You're going to have different species of fish. I notice a lot of times white bass, they tend to suspend and they tend to be actively shooting on bait. So a lot of times I can get out here, and sometimes they mix with the bass. But the bigger bass, they typically are oriented closer to the bottom, and they are kind of stacked going up the ledge. So in other words, they're not stacked right on top of each other. You get white bass, crappie, and stuff, they'll actually create columns, pushing up into the water column there. So that's not what you're looking for. If you start seeing that, or if you start seeing really big marks, this is one thing that I always recommend doing. So I've got a few ledges. I took Joe to a ledge the other day. We were talking about his electronics and how to see fish. What I typically do is I'll find an area when I have a new graph that I'm looking at, and I know there's some bass in this area. I will idle that over and over consecutive days until I can figure out what those bass look like on my graph. How big are they on your side scan? A lot of times you'll be surprised how tiny of a mark you'll actually find on your side scan for a bass. That looks very tiny. It's hard to, or it's easy to miss if you're not very careful. So, and again, 2D sonar, every 2D sonar is different. So a mark that looks big on mine might look small on yours. So you have to figure out what your particular sonar looks like when you're looking at those fish. So what I typically do is I find that first school that I know it's bass. I've caught a couple bass out of there. I'll idle it over and over again. I just got a Garmin 93 SV at the beginning of the year, and I'm just now really getting good at knowing what size those fish are before I make that cast. I know what the bass look like now. I know what size they are a lot of times before I make that cast, whether they're keeper size bass, whether they're really big marks. So, and I also can tell right away if it's carp or sturgeon or paddlefish or whatever. Typically, again, they're suspended off the bottom. Catfish a lot of times will suspend off the bottom and they're more spread out, but bigger marks. You can almost always tell what those fish look like. The bass, they're going to be quite a few of them together, but you'll notice them kind of stacked down the ledge, or on side scan, they'll be kind of spread out in a circle. They won't be, pushed right up on each other. Let's see here. He says that the Angler app actually has a streamflow overlay on a lot of lakes, so that's kind of a cool thing. I'm looking into the Angler thing too. I might actually try that out just for my personal keeping logs of my fishing and stuff like that. Eric says he's on TN Bass and says he's on Loudon ledge fishing right now. Let's see here. Where would be a good place to start with the John boat when coming down from Crossville? If I was fishing in a John boat, I don't know if you've got electronics on it. What I'm typically going to find, if I'm, smaller boat, I can't cover as much water on these ledges, I'm going to pick an area, say like Chester Frost, a creek, and I'm going to go looking for grass. There's still a lot of fish there's decent grass, emergent grass that's coming up, you know, a foot and a half high in a lot of areas. And a lot of fish and bait are transitioning into that grass. I notice it's between 6 and 8 feet, so that's a good thing to look for. I heard the chick is really on fire right now. Probably going to drive down and fish the weekend. Buddy from work drove down last weekend, caught a 6.5. Nice. Yep, the Chickamauga has been on fire this past week. I noticed, though, a lot of the ledge bite has slowed down since we had this cold front. It should start to get good towards the weekend again, though. Joe, as you know, said something pretty important here. So, found a big school of fish, but only got one bite this morning. It's so incredible how much timing plays into catching these fish. So, Cole Sands, he fishes for Bryan College fishing team. We actually fished the poor man's tournament or poor boys tournament out of Dayton Sunday morning. So we ran down from Dayton all the way south and fished 20 to 30 ledge spots all the way back. Well, the problem was, we got out there, we marked tons of fish, caught a bunch of small fish, but had, in finding schools of 50, 100, 200 fish and getting 3 to 4 bites out of it. And the main thing was that current didn't turn on until about 12:30. And it really didn't start to even interact with our spots or our ledges until 1 o'clock. Well, the problem for us was the tournament was over at 2 o'clock. So we ended up going in with 5 fish for 12.44 pounds. We still got second place in the tournament, but absolutely horrible showing compared to what we had been catching. Funny thing is, Cole actually went out later that day and smoked a 30-pound bag. So it's amazing, hit the same areas that we had hit in the morning, but coming back in the afternoon when that bite window was on, when the current was pushing the bait and the fish were positioned properly and ready to eat, makes all the difference in the world. All right. Any more questions on the ledge fishing here? And I'll do some videos. I figured out finally on my Garmin how I can screen record. So I'm going to do some videos actually idling some schools so we can see what the fish and the bait look like and how the fish position on there. But I think one of the main things that we can do now when we're talking about a map study here is that we can go ahead and talk about how to actually idle these particular areas to find those fish. Again, you don't want to go 90 degrees off of here. You don't want to go directly parallel. In my experience, going at a 45 and picking the area that you want to actually hit is extremely important. Let's see here. If you had the choice between ledge fishing now or going around the first part of October and maybe frog fishing, which would I do? It's hard to say because they're already out spraying the grass again. And this past year, the grass never really got up in a lot of the lake. On the north end, there was quite a bit of grass, but everyone who wanted to punch or frog fish was up there beating the crap out of it all the time. So in my opinion, I never got on just like a great frog bite. To me, a great frog bite is when I can go out and catch 20 to 30 fish and have a good time. It was really tough for me a lot of times when I was doing that, catching a few fish, but having to beg for bites, so to speak, on there. So honestly, I would probably come down here and try to do some ledge fishing, but I would get here early. If you're going to ledge fish on any of these Tennessee River lakes, it's best to be the first guy out there, the first guy making the cast on those fish, because as the summer progresses, these schools, the nice thing is they kind of stay in relatively the same type of areas. However, they tend to just get beat up and beat up and beat up. Joe actually mentioned earlier, if you get up, these main community holes, Saudi Hump, go down here, around Sequoia, Skull Island area, go down here, Chester Frost Hump, go up here, Sail Creek Hump. You go to these areas, the tip of Hiwassee Island over here. At any time of the day, at any time during the week, there's going to be several boats posted up on these areas. So those fish, they're huge schools of fish, which is awesome, but they're getting beat up and beat up and beat up. So, that's the thing. Get out there first and then be creative. That's another good point that I haven't mentioned yet is when you're talking about what baits to use, you want to be really creative in what you're using. You want to throw something different, and you want to have an arsenal on deck. This is not a type of fishing that you're going to have one or two poles on deck and go and catch a bunch of fish. Typically I'll have a crankbait tied on, whether it's between a 6XD to a 10XD, a lot of other different brands thrown in there, some, Z-Bosses and Norman crankbaits thrown in there. So a variety of crankbaits. I'll have also always tied up a variety of spoons. So if you look at this here, we'll go back to, let's see here, this view. I've got a spoon on here, and this is actually a really cool rig. Let y'all have a look at that. I've got a split ring on the front. It's all tangled up right now, of course, but you always put a treble on that split ring, at least I do, and then I've got the actual swivel itself to keep the line twist on there. But I learned this trick from a good buddy of mine, Scott at Hog Farmer. You can take, and a few feet up from your spoon, I've got a front runner on there. It basically gives me another chance as that spoon is pushing up and down. I've got another bait, another chance. You actually can double up on those fish a lot of times and catch two at a time. Another bait I like to have tied on is, we'll go back to the map study screen here. Let's see here. Another bait I like to have tied on is a big worm. And I have usually a shaky head tied on, so a heavy shaky head, 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce sometimes, or a football jig. But I also like to run a Carolina rig, so I have that tied up, the old ball and chain, so to speak, with a 2-foot leader or so. And another thing I like to have tied up, let's see here, is a scrounger. Let me go ahead and actually pull a couple of these out. If you guys have not gone by and visited Scott yet over at Hog Farmer, you're missing out, because this time of the year, he's got some stuff that's really going to help y'all catch a bunch more fish. So, boom. Going back to this screen again. Hog Wobbler, a big scrounger, guys. I typically get several sizes, so I'm going to have a 3/4 ounce, I'm going to have a 1 ounce, and an 1.25 ounces. That'll help me fish different depth ranges and different levels of current. But these right here, it's that spunk shad. 4.5 inch and 5.5 inch, and I typically get a lot of colors. You put that bad boy on your scrounger, and it works awesome to catch those finicky bass. It's also great for his, he's got a Ned head, and that's a sneaky way to catch some good fish out deep as well. Drop shot, you have to have a drop shot rigged up. Mikey Balls got me into throwing a Nico rig, and I caught several fish, ledge fishing already this year with it. But I think the main thing I want to say is get 10, 12 rods rigged up, have them on deck and ready, and you have to cycle through those. It's amazing to me how day to day what those fish want is different. So some days they'll be keyed in, they want a crankbait. Sometimes they want a crankbait slow. Sometimes they want it to where you reel it down, stop it, let it float up a little bit, reel it down, stop it again, drag it like a Carolina rig. I've seen a million different things. You got to understand these fish are really pressured. Their mood is different every day. So get out there, throw something different at them, and don't be afraid to cycle through baits. It's really good to have a buddy in the boat with you too, where you can run through and try some different things. But main things that I use, I guess staples that I catch fish on every year ledge fishing: football jig, spoon, big crankbait, big worm. Those generally will get a bite, but I'll sneak in there. Of course, like Joe and I went out, I think it was yesterday, and they wouldn't hit anything out there. Would not hit anything, but you put a drop shot in their face or that little Nico rig, and boom, you're loaded up with a fish. Let's see here. Got any good GPS coordinates for some good ledges? Bill says. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a ledge right here. A good ledge to fish. So, let's see, fine, yep. Right here is a sneaky little spot. So here's an island, offshore island, good area, community hole, right? Well, right here where these contour lines change below that island, right in here is a great area to start when you're ledge fishing. That's one I'll give you, and of course the main community holes. You got this island here, you got Sail Creek Island, you got Saudi Hump down there, Chester Frost. Those are all good areas to just go ahead and get started. But again, good luck finding a time to fish those areas. That should get you started there. But if you look at those kind of areas, it'll give you an idea of what the fish look like and where to start looking for some of these trickier areas where you have these inside turns and transitions like that. We're also going to have a mayfly hatch coming soon, so that'll push a lot of those fish to the bank as well. Mark says he loves fishing Ratton Branch. I've never heard of that. I don't know where that is. Never fished it. I might have fished it. I just didn't know. Yeah, he says you got to best the live bait guys out there. That's exactly right. Heath and a lot of the other guys you'll find or out there on these community holes throwing live baits, which is awesome. They catch a ton of fish. Randy says he wants to learn a spoon. A spoon is a really good bait in the summertime, but I will tell you, especially a big spoon, it'll spook the school. And what'll happen, there's a lot of guys know that when you're crankbait fishing, when you have a big plug out there, a lot of times you get down there, you catch a fish, those other fish are trying to get that plug out of that fish's mouth, and it'll actually pull the school out and off the ledge. And so it can actually be detrimental to a long-term ledge bite. So it's important to understand what baits you're going to throw first in there. A spoon is never a bait that I throw first into a school. It's never going to be that first one I push into there. Let's see here. I'm going to go back to map study mode. I messed up, guys. I was going to show you some spots on there. Let's see here. You should be able to see them now. There we go. Okay. Yeah. We'll go back through these spots. Okay, we got hump here. We got this ledge. This is the ledge I was trying to tell you about right off of out from Cell Creek here. That's a good spot to start out. But anyway, we've already talked about several of those right there. I messed up on that. Let's see. Yeah, so going back to how to cycle through baits. Typically, what I'm going to start with is going to be a finesse technique and like my drag technique. So I'm going to start out throwing those. If I can't get bit on those, I'm going to transition into my crankbaits. It's a more aggressive tactic. Sometimes it's a good starter if you know that's what's firing up the fish lately in those areas. So sometimes I'll start out with that crankbait, get down there and fire those fish up. The spoon is always last because it'll do one of two things. It's either going to start catching a fire out of the fish in that school, or it's going to completely shut the whole thing down. There's usually no difference into here on what that is. So, but typically when I'm spoon fishing, I fish a lot of different sizes. The one that you saw there is it's a Nichols Lake Fork spoon, 6-inch. I like that one. I usually don't go to the 5-inch unless I'm fishing shallower. It just doesn't tend to get down to those fish, but that's a type of flutter spoon. You also have jigging spoons, the same ones that you use in the wintertime. I'm going to push over to Tackle Freaks here. And any of this stuff is available, guys, on there. So we're going to go to spoons and blade baits. A blade bait is also a good summertime bait. But let's see here. It's all so blown out right now. Boom. You see this river to sea spoon here? This is a good example of what's more like a casting spoon or a jigging spoon. These are really good for staying down on the bottom, being a smaller presentation. It gets down there, and you can jig these right off the bottom. They don't have as much of that fluttering, crazy, wild action, but you can catch tons and tons of fish on those, really in the summertime and the wintertime. But a lot of guys, myself included, like these big flutter spoons, like this one right here. Like these flutter spoons in the summertime. And basically what that thing's going to do is it's going to just go crazy. When you lift it up, you rip it up, let it fall down, and it's going to flutter all the way down. Typically, I swap back and forth to see what the fish want that day. If you let that thing fall on a semi-slack line, what it'll actually do is start to push away from you. And it can actually push up current. You can rip it up, semi-slack line, get it to actually fall back towards those fish and really get those fish to go. A lot of guys do this around marinas and docks too, on like spotted bass lakes. They can get that thing to push up underneath the floating docks or the marina docks there. If you let it fall on a slack line, it'll typically flutter for a second and then find its way to where it'll shoot like a bullet back down. So when you're first letting it fall to the bottom, I like to try to get it on as much of a slack line as I can because it helps get it down to the bottom faster than a lot of other ways that you can do that. But again, a hard rip, you're basically setting the hook, ripping that thing up at the bottom. Sometimes it's a rip, sometimes it's one rip, and then you let it fall back down to the bottom and repeat. If you've got a school that's really fired up, a lot of times I don't even let it sink back to the bottom if they're deeper. I'll rip it again, kind of like guys that are fishing saltwater, where you're ripping it and pulling that school up to the boat, and eventually you'll get one to bite. Let's see here. Yeah, Randy says you're just seeing your ugly mug. Okay, we're going to go back over here. I'll actually show you some of these ledge spots. Good grief, good grief. All right, so we're on map study mode. Pow. Here's one of the ledges that I like to fish right here. You got Sail Creek, go upriver, you got this island right here, where these contour lines are adjacent to the island and they get tight together. This point, this inside turn, those are really good areas to start looking for fish. Any of these humps right here, all the way up here, Hiwassee Island, the low end tip, the upper end tip of it, this island right here, these are all community holes. You get down there and it's just obvious, a lot of fish to mark. A lot of different species of fish can help you figure out what the bass look like on here. Boom. Saudi hump. Go down further. We got around Sequoia where all the pros fish in these tournaments. Right around this area. You got Chester Frost hump. You got the points, the secondary points of the Harrison Bay Islands. Tons of stuff to look at through here. You got another big hump right down here towards the dam that's good to find fish on. So tons of areas where you can begin to look for those fish and start to try to find what they look like on there, and then start to transition to areas adjacent to it where these flats are and try to find your sneaky stuff where you can catch those fish. Any more questions on here? Yeah, sorry about that, boys. All right, any more questions? We're going to wrap up pretty soon here. Let's see what we got. We can do this with some other lakes too. I know a lot of you guys like to fish Nickajack. A lot of you like to fish Watts Bar. It's the same thing, you know. You can go through here and you can find these areas in advance, you know. Obvious, look, we got a main lake hump up here on Watts Bar. Easy area to find. Boom, another hump right here. Now, these are obvious areas that you should be able to catch fish ledge fishing. Let's see here. Any more questions? What we got for questions on here? Swim baits on ledges. That's a really good point. You know, I talked about the scrounger. I didn't talk about a big swim bait. You know, typically like a hollow body style swim bait, or, you know, one of these semi-hollow body ones like the driftwood or the Saudi custom tackle type swim baits can be really good on the ledges. I can't really get, you know, a finesse swim bait can be good too if you have a heavy enough darter head to get it down. But most of the time when I'm going to throw a swim bait on a school, it's going to be a 5.5, 6 inch swim bait, something I can get down there with a nice heavy head. I'm looking for an ounce to an ounce and a quarter head to keep that thing down there, because it's really annoying when you're swim bait fishing. Unless those fish are kind of pulled up, you know, if they're a little bit suspended, you can throw that out there and begin to reel it and actually pull it in above those fish. Now, if you're if it's deeper, or, you know, if the fish are right on the bottom, it's hard to keep that thing on the bottom. So you notice a lot of times with a scrounger or a swim bait, you're firing it really far out there and you're reeling it a few cranks and having to let it sink back down, and reeling it a few cranks and having to let it sink back down. So the heavier the weight, sometimes you can actually get that thing to glue down to the bottom a little bit better. And that's an important thing. You got to be where those fish are. And another thing that we talked about, you know, Joe and I noticed when we were out there, is when you have a lot of current. You know, he was throwing a drop shot trying to get to the school of fish. Well, he was, you know, marking fish right under the trolling motor. You're trying to drop it right down to him. And I explained to him, you know, that current is going to swing, pendulum that bait way past the back of the boat by the time it reaches 25 foot of water. So if you're marking fish directly under the boat you want to catch with your drop shot or your spoon, you actually need to cast up current 20, 30, sometimes even more feet up current. So when that bait finally hits the bottom, it's in position to hit those fish. So you'll notice a lot of times when you're cranking or you're doing any of these other techniques, a lot of times you almost sit, in the current, almost on the fish. You don't want them too far ahead of you so you can make a bomb cast, and by the time it reaches, whatever presentation it is, reaches the bottom, it actually has time to interact with those fish for a moment before you have to reel it up and start again. You can't throw directly where those fish are and expect that bait to get down there, is what I'm trying to say. Another thing that a lot of guys ask me is how I line up to fish. So say I'm fishing this hump over here. I'm not going to line up here above this hump and throw back down current. Typically, I'm going to line up shallow on that hump. Say my fish are located here. I'm going to line up here, cast up here, further up current, and allow that bait to push back through those fish. That way it's fishing, drifting down naturally with the current. Now, sometimes you can still fish shallow to deep. So say the fish are on this particular side right here. You can line up here, make a cast up, and let that bait pendulum down and make like an arc here and fish shallow to deep. A lot of times you can also fish uphill. So you can say the fish are sitting here again, but you hang out here, you throw across and let that bait pendulum and run uphill. So depending on how the fish want it that day, I've noticed sometimes they want it fished uphill, sometimes they want it fished downhill. Jason, do you find line selection makes a difference when ledge fishing? Do I use fluorocarbon? Absolutely. That's a great point. Pretty much exclusively fluorocarbon when I'm ledge fishing. Line makes a tremendous difference on there as far as getting that bait down there. I'm going to use much lighter line than I typically do. On most of these techniques, when I'm throwing a swim bait, a scrounger, 15-pound test typically is what I'm going to use. That thinner diameter line cuts through the water really well, stays down there in the water column with those fish. When I'm throwing big crankbaits, even all the way up to a 10XD, 10 to 12-pound test does the job on that. Spoon fishing is really the only one I'll go 18 to 20 because it's such a heavy bait, it'll get down there anyway. My Carolina rigs and stuff, again, 15, maybe 18-pound test. I don't want to go much more than that because that diameter, the bigger the diameter is on that, the more it has drag, which in other words acts on having a bigger belly in the line, which hurts my bite detection. It also keeps the bait from falling as quickly. You want it to cut and get down there as quick as possible. When do I catch a fish on a spot lock? Then when I catch a fish on a spot lock, wow, Terry, I don't know what you're talking about there. Maybe a tip for you non-tournament guys and gals to cover water. You can nail down the depth, like the nearest contour line. Yep, that's a good thing to do. You can go, you can actually highlight on a lot of these units too, a particular depth range, which can be very helpful. So say if I'm finding fish on my ledge spots in 25 foot, I can highlight 25 feet and easily find those next areas I want to mark, graph, and then fish. You will see me fishing. Let's see here. What would I throw on nickajack right now? That's a good question. If I'm ledge fishing, same baits that we talked about before, but with this much current that's actually pushing down to the dam over there, I would probably get up in the tail race, fish small body crankbaits like Wigglewort, Bandit 300, Bandit 200. I would throw a spinner bait. I would throw small swim baits, jerk bait, and a jig. And you could probably come out 18, 20 pounds a day down there right now. All right. Let's see here. Any more questions here? I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon here. Forgot we're on Watts Bar now. Run back down through Chickamauga. What you'll notice though, they're spraying the grass right now, but if a lot of this grass survives, what'll happen is the fish will split. You'll have a lot more fish that'll stay up in the grass and shallow, backs in the creeks and stuff like that. And you'll have fish that'll stay on the ledges, but a bite that we've got coming up here very soon, guys, in the next week and a half, 2 weeks, is there's going to be a mayfly hatch. The first one of the year is really going to take off, and that'll flood the banks with willow flies, flood the banks with the bluegill and a lot of other panfish species, and what happens is the fish will get piled up into there as well. So we'll probably talk about that on the next live stream and go through there, but that's something you have to, if you're stuck on ledge fishing, you'll miss that bite if you're not careful, and that can be a really good bite to get on. Isaiah says, how far back do I stay from the break to keep from running over them while you hover over the edge? Typically when I'm ledge fishing, most of the time these fish are going to be 25 to 20, 20 to 25 foot of water. So I'm not as worried about running them over. I'm going to try to keep far enough back where my pinging sonar is not disturbing those fish. Typically, so say the other day, Joe and I were out on the ledge. The current was running 45,000 or so. So in other words, it was ripping hard enough where it was, had to make a decent cast to get the bait down. I was sitting with the boat spot locked. The fish themselves were about 20 to 30 foot in front of the boat, and we were making a 50 to 60 foot cast to get the bait down and interact with those fish. That's typically how I do it. If they're running more current, so say it's 60, 70,000, those fish will tend to be shallower, but if you have to line up with them, you might only have them 10 to 15 foot in front of the boat and still have to make a relatively long cast to get the bait in front of them, especially if you're talking about crankbait fishing. If there's not much current at all, so less than 20, you can basically sit pretty far off the fish, make a cast, and the bait will sink and not be impeded by the current as much. So I guess the answer to that question is it depends on how much current, but I try to stay as far back as I can so I'm not disturbing the fish without keeping me from getting into the strike zone and staying there for a good amount of time. Have I tried Alabama rigs on ledges with any success? I haven't had much success on Alabama rigs on the ledges at all. I catch them in the wintertime on these same ledges with an Alabama rig, but not really as much in the summer, especially when these schools get beat up so much. I do notice it comes into play in the fall for me a lot, and I use a lighter wire rig, smaller rig, typically without blades and really natural, and you reel it really fast for schooling fish, and that works pretty good. Let's see here. A lot of grass will be gone due to the floodgates. Yeah. It's coming up pretty good, though. It's coming up. The grass is doing pretty good. Bill says he wants to fish grass. Is there a creek that you find more grass in? Pretty much all the creeks right now have some grass in it, especially on these flat type areas. There's one in Sell Creek. Got grass forming along this area here. A lot of your flats, especially where they have cuts coming out, have grass on them right now. Chester Frost itself is getting a lot of grass on it. Around Harrison Bay Islands is getting a lot of grass on there. So there's tons of areas. What I typically would tell you is to find areas relatively protected from the current on flats or in creeks, and then in that 6 to 8 foot of water range, and you'll start to pick up on grass in those areas. What's up, Justin? All right. Grasshopper. Yeah, I haven't been inside Grasshopper recently, so I don't know if there's grass coming up in it, but just based on what I'm seeing on other parts of the lake, I would say Grasshopper's starting to get some grass in it as well. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up this week's BassQuest Live. I'm going to try to do another one next week for you. We'll probably talk about the mayfly hatch. If you have any special requests on anything, let me know. Comment on the video when it comes out, and I'll see what we can do for you as far as some videos coming up. But hope y'all enjoyed it. As always, I hope this week finds you out on the water, and I will catch you there.